The richest man who ever lived left behind an entire book of financial wisdom. Scholars have read it for 3,000 years. Pastors have preached from it for centuries. And yet, somehow, the church has managed to teach almost none of what Solomon actually meant. Not because they were hiding it, because they were reading it wrong. Today we're going inside Solomon's actual methods, the ones buried in plain sight in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and we're going to pull out 5 principles that your pastor almost certainly never preached on Sunday morning. Not because they're heretical, because they're uncomfortable, and because they require you to think like a builder, not just a believer. Let's establish who we're actually talking about. Solomon didn't inherit a prosperous kingdom. He inherited a nation that had just finished 40 years of war under his father David. The treasury existed, the infrastructure was minimal. The temple hadn't been built, the trade routes weren't established. What Solomon built in a single generation was so vast that ancient historians couldn't find a unit of measurement large enough to describe it accurately. 1 Kings tells us that the weight of gold brought to Solomon in a single year was 666 talents. Modern estimates put that at somewhere between $30 and $50 million annually, just in gold tribute. That doesn't count trade income, taxation, or the revenue from his commercial fleet. He built the first temple in Jerusalem. He built his own palace, which took 13 years. He established trade routes from Africa to Arabia. He cultivated partnerships with Hiram of Tyre, with the Queen of Sheba, with the Pharaoh of Egypt. And then he wrote it down. Not in a memoir, not in a royal proclamation. He wrote it in short, dense, almost cryptic sayings, what we call the Proverbs, and in a longer philosophical reflection on everything he learned called Ecclesiastes. The church has treated Proverbs like a collection of moral fortune cookies. Solomon meant it as a manual. Here's how to read it like one. Principle 1. Solomon was an obsessive observer before he was ever a builder. Proverbs 4 verse 7. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. That sounds circular, and if you read it as a moral lesson, it is. But read it as a wealth psychology principle, and it means something specific. Before you build anything, you must first develop the capacity to see clearly. Solomon doesn't say the beginning of wealth is hard work. He doesn't say the beginning of success is faith. He says the beginning is wisdom, which in Hebrew the word is chokmah, meaning skill, expertise, the ability to see how things actually work, rather than how you wish they worked. He made it his first priority to understand systems, natural systems, economic systems, human behavioral systems, before he invested a single resource in building. Ecclesiastes 1, verse 13. I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. The church teaches this as humility. Solomon meant it as strategy. Before you build, you observe. Before you invest, you understand the system. Before you act, you develop the capacity to see what others are missing. This is why he could negotiate with Hiram of Tyre as an equal. He understood the timber trade. Why he could impress the Queen of Sheba. He understood her economy before she arrived. Why his commercial fleet succeeded where others failed. He studied the roots. Observation is not passive. In Solomon's framework, it is the first and most essential act of wealth building. Principle 2. Solomon never confused working hard with working alone. Proverbs 11 verse 14. Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety. The church preaches this as a lesson about community. Solomon built it into his organizational structure. 1 Kings 4 describes Solomon's administrative structure in detail that most readers skip right over. He had 12 district governors, each responsible for supplying the royal household for 1 month per year. He had a chief of staff, a secretary, a recorder, a head of forced labor, a head of the palace, and a head of trade. He didn't manage any of this himself. He built systems staffed by people who were excellent at specific things, and he positioned himself above the system, as the architect, not the operator. Proverbs 24, verse 3. By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. The word for house here, bayit, doesn't just mean a dwelling. It means a household, an estate, a dynasty, an enterprise. Solomon built a bayit, an entire economic ecosystem, not by doing more, but by designing better. The wealth principle here is almost uncomfortable in its clarity. Your ceiling isn't your effort. Your ceiling is the quality of the systems and people you build around you. Solomon understood leverage, not as a financial instrument, but as a design philosophy. You don't scale by working harder, you scale by building structures that multiply your judgment. Principle 3. Solomon was obsessed with timing in a way the church has almost entirely spiritualized away. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven." You've heard this at funerals, you've seen it on inspirational posters. Solomon meant it as an economic principle. Read the full chapter. He lists planting and uprooting, breaking down and building up, scattering stones and gathering them, keeping and throwing away. These are not metaphors for emotional states, these are descriptions of productive cycles, the rhythm of investment, growth, harvest, and reinvestment that governs every economic system. Proverbs 6 verse 6 through 8. "Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest." The ant doesn't work because someone told her to. She works because she understands the cycle. She knows winter is coming. She positions herself in advance. Solomon's wealth wasn't built in a single brilliant transaction. It was built through decades of positioning, establishing trade routes before the demand fully existed, building the temple during a period of regional peace, accumulating reserves during years of abundance. He understood that time, applied correctly, is the most powerful multiplier available to anyone who can read the cycle they're operating in. The church calls this patience. Solomon called it strategy. Principle 4. Solomon had a surprisingly sophisticated theology of productive risk. Ecclesiastes 11 verse 1. "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days." This is almost universally taught as a lesson about generosity. Give freely, and God will return it. That interpretation isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. The Hebrew context is mercantile. Casting bread upon waters was the language of maritime trade, sending cargo ships out across uncertain waters with no guarantee of return, trusting that the investment would produce yield. Solomon isn't just teaching generosity, he's teaching calculated risk. Verse 2, "Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may come upon the land." This is diversification. This is portfolio theory, written 3,000 years before modern finance had a name for it. Don't put everything in one ship. Don't make one bet. Distribute across multiple ventures because you cannot predict which one will encounter a storm. Verse 4, "Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap." This is the verse the church never preaches on. Solomon is saying, if you wait for perfect conditions, you will never build anything. The person who demands certainty before acting guarantees their own poverty. Risk in Solomon's framework is not the opposite of wisdom. Paralysis is. Wisdom means understanding that uncertainty is a permanent feature of the environment, and building in spite of it through diversification and consistent action. Principle 5. Solomon understood that wealth is built from the inside out, and this is the one the church gets closest to, but still misses. Proverbs 4 verse 23. "Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life." The church preaches this as a warning against sin. Solomon meant it as a foundation for everything else in this list. The Hebrew word translated heart here is lev, which in ancient Hebrew culture meant not just emotion, but the seat of thought, will, identity, and decision-making. It's the whole inner life of a person. Solomon is saying, the quality of what flows out of your life, including your financial life, is determined by what you are maintaining on the inside. This is why he begins Proverbs not with financial instruction, but with identity instruction. Who are you becoming? What are you allowing to shape your thinking? What voices, what influences, what patterns of thought are you feeding? Proverbs 23 verse 7. In the older translations, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. This isn't prosperity gospel. Prosperity gospel says, think rich and God will make you rich. Solomon says something more demanding. Your inner life will eventually express itself in your outer life, for better or worse. The person whose inner world is characterized by fear, scarcity, envy, or short-term thinking will build a life that reflects those things, regardless of how hard they work. The person who cultivates wisdom, long-range thinking, honest self-assessment, and disciplined attention builds differently, sees differently, acts differently. Wealth in Solomon's framework is not primarily a financial achievement. It is the natural expression of a particular kind of inner development. That's uncomfortable in church because it means your financial life is a mirror, not a mystery. 5 principles, 3,000 years old, almost entirely absent from Sunday morning. Observe before you act. Build systems that multiply your judgment. Position yourself inside the cycle of time. Take calculated risks through diversification. And tend your inner world as the foundation of everything else. Solomon didn't build his kingdom through exceptional luck or divine favoritism alone. He built it by applying principles, ancient, consistent, transferable principles that still work in exactly the same way they worked in the 10th century before Christ. That's the wealth code the church inherited and mostly forgot to teach. If this kind of biblical financial thinking is new to you, or if you've been in church for years and never heard it framed this way, I want you to hit subscribe and stay with this channel. Because we're just getting started. In the next video, we're going to look at Joseph, a man who built generational wealth starting from a prison cell, and pull out the specific economic decisions that turned his captivity into the most powerful position in the ancient world. You don't want to miss that one. Until then, build wisely.